Welcome to today's webinar, The Domino Effect, 5 Cascading Benefits of a Fleet Safety Program, presented by Supervision. I'm Chris Wolski with Automotive Fleet, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we do not get to yours, don't worry. You will be contacted via email with a response after the event. Our presenter today is Russ Bellin, Senior Product Director at Supervision. Russ has spent the last 20 years using data to solve problems and improve organizations. His passion for the fleet and safety industry has fueled Supervision's product suite growth from its core and driver's license monitoring to the comprehensive portfolio it has today, covering driver performance, document management, CSA score analysis, hazmat compliance, and more. And in addition, Russ has spoken at numerous industry conferences and events about safety and NVR. So without further delay, I'll hand the reins over to Russ. Take it away.
Hey, Chris, thank you very much for that nice introduction. So I want to welcome everybody to the webinar today. As Chris said, I lead the product and marketing strategy for Supervision, and also, as Chris said, our foundation has been in driver's license monitoring. We grew out of the insurance industry, monitoring drivers for insurance companies, and then moved into the fleet world and have grown the Supervision product suite since then. But our passion is really, we strive to make fleets more safe. And we think about it all the time. We're constantly working for more solutions that can help fleets overcome, reduce accidents, drive a better safety culture. And that's really what the conversation today is about. It's about what are the benefits of implementing a safety program or a safety culture within your organization. And we'll spend a little bit of time today talking about the benefits, what are those cascading benefits of having this program in place, but then also talk about some tangible things you can do in the short term to get moving on it. And then I'll talk a little bit of time at the end about what it takes to drive cultural change. And we'll go into some examples of how you can influence your teams so that safety becomes top of mind. But I really want to start by saying, kind of where are you guys at today? Are you already implemented and looking for ways to drive more success out of your current safety program? Or are you considering implementing this program and you're looking for business case support? Like, how can I quantify the value of driving a safety culture within my organization? Or are you really new and it's like, I don't know exactly what I need to do, but I know I need to start to pay attention and drive a more safe environment for my fleet? And so I'll let you guys can kind of answer that and we can come back to it at the end of the presentation. But my goal in bringing that up is to say these are the things we're going to kind of talk about today. We're going to walk through and try to give you some tangible benefits of what it means and what it brings you by driving a strong safety culture in your organization. And we'll walk through kind of this agenda that you're seeing in the screen in front of you. So to get started, I want to start with a story. So one day, one of our data scientists comes up to me and he's like, hey, Russ, I've got some really interesting information. He said, I've been mapping the number of violations to a fleet safety score. Now, I know we've got regulated fleets on the line and we've got non-regulated fleets on the line. So if you're a non-regulated fleet, a safety score is like a golf score. The better you are, the lower the score. And he said, you can see this nice straight line of violations, Russ, but as your violations go up, so does your safety score. And I said, Morley, that was the data scientist's name. I said, you're not telling me anything I don't know. This is why the CSA score is what it is. It's predicated on if you get more violations, you're deemed to be more unsafe. And Morley said, but Russ, that's not the interesting thing I have to tell you. I took the fleet safety scores and I mapped it against the accidents. And it looks to me like the scatter plot chart just threw up on itself. And for those of you like me that don't have a math PhD like Morley, what this really means is a CSA safety score doesn't do a very good job of predicting who's more risky and ready to have accidents than almost anything else. In fact, there's really not a lot of correlation, which for those of us on the regulated side are saying That's why you hear so much from the FMCSA about redoing the scores and wanting to create this IRT model that you've probably heard so much about, because the old score wasn't doing a very good job of being a safety score, and they need to try to figure it out. And they put a lot of conversation about this safety culture and what it means to drive the safety culture throughout the organization. So what you're seeing in this slide now is a real example. This happened not more than 2 months ago with a colleague of mine's company. This is a brand new water truck. Cost the company $500,000. And what happened is, we know from the telematics data, this truck was traveling at about 52 miles an hour down this road. And then the driver was drinking, semi-ironically, a plastic bottle of water, and he dropped the cap between his knees. He bent over while driving to pick up the cap, and when he did, the one hand that remained on the steering wheel pulled the rig towards the ditch. He jumped up, overcorrected by steering the rig back the other way. When the load balance moved, the truck flipped on its side, bent the frame, totaled the vehicle. A couple other things about this accident. If you look closely at the picture on the right, you'll see that path on the side of the road is a bike path. And 911 was called by the middle school person who watched it happen out their window, because it was across the street from a school when this happened. So it was a pretty bad accident. Nobody was hurt seriously. There was some bumps and bruises, but nobody was seriously hurt. But this fleet was self-insured, cost them $500,000. So obviously, had this fleet put in place a strong safety culture, this accident wouldn't have happened. Now, I don't think you can really say that. You don't know for sure if it would have. But what I think I can tell you for sure is that that driver, when he bent over to pick up the bottle cap, he didn't have the company's safety policy or their program in his mind at all. It was just a reactive thing, something we all might have done, but he reached down and he did it, and he caused a major accident for the company. And I think the goal of the safety culture is to say, we want to stop these things. We want to make sure that before you act, you think safety first. In everything that you do, safety first, and you'll prevent accidents. And that is ultimately one of the primary goals of your safety program, is to reduce accidents, but there's many other benefits to having a strong safety culture in place. So for instance, safety can drive sales. And when I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine that sold third-party logistics, and he said, Russ, I have 100 competitors. A company can pick anybody they want to ship their goods. But if I can convince them that my drivers are better, they're safer, and I'm going to get their goods where it's supposed to go on time with little interruption, I can drive more business. Safety drives sales. So many times, and I looked at the list of registrants on this webinar, and I see so many operations people. And I wonder sometimes if people connect the value that you do in keeping these fleets on the road and safe, and how it reflects directly back into your company's ability to drive new business. The other benefits that we talk about is, your risk profiles improve, and obviously there's costs of accidents and liabilities. You want to curtail those, those relative, or there's very large expenses. So those are direct benefits. Everyone kind of gets it. And then if you look at the next step, is if you become more safe, as you go down and your company adopts this culture and you stop having issues, there's a lot of other factors that help your business out. So fuel cost, maintenance cost, even how you spec your vehicles can be impacted by safety. Cost of ownership, and then your fleet's reputation are the 5 benefits that we're going to dig just a little bit more deeply into. But that's kind of a bird's eye view of some benefits that you get from this fleet safety culture. So for instance, let's talk about slashing fuel costs, because it seems relatively obvious, but the world of telematics helps us quantify this so easily if you're using telematics within your fleet. But one thing we know, the same behaviors that are risky and can cause accidents are burning more fuel. And with fuel being the number one cost usually for large fleets, finding a way to curtail these events will drive fuel costs. In fact, some studies have said it's between 5 and 30%. So aggressive starts, fast cornering, heavy acceleration, all of those things burn fuel, but they also can become part of your safety program where you can say you can use safety to drive that benefit. So Chris, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add there, but feel free to jump in at any time if you feel like if there's a better way to state what I'm showing here.
Okay, thanks.
With that, the next section is, trimming maintenance costs. So if your shop is full, you've got preventative maintenance you're trying to do, you've got other things to do, and an accident happens, and you've got this severe cost of the accident. You've got to fix the truck. So on average, they say that's $70,000. But what else? The other thing it's doing that's driving costs up in the organization is now your shop is full. And vehicles that are supposed to go through preventative maintenance, they either don't go through it, they get delayed and sit in the shop, or you hire overtime and third-party people to fix these things that are expensive. And then maybe the most important benefit of keeping these vehicles out of the shop is that if your vehicle's not on the road, you're not making money. If you're an over-the-road truck driver, that vehicle's not generating any income. But even if you're a plumber, and that vehicle is now out of service, that plumber can't get to the job site, and that's costing the business money. So whether you're regulated or non-regulated, these increased maintenance costs have a serious impact to the bottom line of the business. You can quantify it if you just think about the size of your business and how much you plan to spend on maintenance and what happens when an accident happens and how that inflates or causes pain within that service cycle. So that's maintenance costs. Third benefit is this idea of enhanced spec'ing. And it's what we're talking about here is when you make decisions about which vehicle to buy, are you bringing your safety program's philosophy into that decision-making process? And the easy example is, say I'm a fleet company that I buy Ford Fusions for my entire sales force. And the Ford Fusion might be a great vehicle for somebody in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but is it the right vehicle for somebody in Colorado Springs, Colorado, who has to drive across the ridges of the Rockies in January? Are you thinking about that person's safety and how that impacts the vehicles that you buy? The wrong vehicle will get in many more accidents, obviously, in weather conditions that it's not built for. You might think about four-wheel drive servicing and things like that as well. The other area that fleet owners really need to start thinking about as they're designing what vehicles to buy for their fleets is safety features. The market is changing radically in terms of what they call ADAS, or Advanced Driver Safety solutions, and they're features on the vehicle that reduce accidents. So the big one that everybody is talking about is this idea of forward collision warning with auto braking. And what it means is that there are sensors in the vehicle that if you're coming up on an object too quickly, it will alert the driver and apply the brakes. And it's pretty amazing the results of the studies that we're seeing. So Hildy is the company that, if you ever watch those crash videos, they crash cars into stuff for fun to see what happens. They did a study looking at police reports across the country, and they analyzed cars that had this automatic braking against cars that were similar in size and scope that did not have the feature attached. They saw a 43% reduction in front to rear crashes. That's amazing. And they also saw a 64% reduction in front to rear crashes where there are injuries involved. And I think we all know what happens to the cost of crashes when there's injuries involved. So the computer system's doing two things. It's slowing the vehicle down and mitigating the crash altogether, or at a minimum, it's slowing the vehicle down and the impact is less severe, so the damages go down and the injuries go down. It's a major benefit to your fleet safety program. I've done a lot of research around this in my job and looking at these advanced safety features. Every study that's ever done, if the computer takes over for the human, the computer always performs better. And it's interesting because it's, they're not taking over the world just yet, but the computer doesn't text and drive. The computer doesn't look at a book. The computer's not, not distracted. It's there all the time, and it's quicker than we are. It reacts faster. So this is making a big difference. If you think about that in vehicle spec'ing, A lot of these features are a little more expensive. You might make a decision to say, I don't want these features in my car, but you really should think about it from a safety program perspective. And if the added cost of the vehicle might go up by $1,000, do you get that return back in reduced accidents? And the other side of that you have to think about is, do you get it back in the resale value of those vehicles when you go to sell them? Now, advanced safety features are in small vehicles, they're in trucks, and they're going into work vans right now. They're not that much into heavy trucks. I think they're a few years away from that, that I know of, at least of right now. But it's something, as you think about vehicle spec'ing, the conditions of the vehicle where you need to be in, and also the safety features that you're offering your employees, keeps them safe, keeps the road safer, it cuts down on lawsuits for that matter. So that's vehicle spec'ing. The fourth benefit is the total cost of ownership, and that is, what is the fuel use, you track, the telematics program allows you great flexibility today in that you can track the vehicle health, utilization, fuel use. It helps you to maintain that vehicle better over time, and it helps improve the resale value down the road. So there's utilization benefits. And then the last benefit we talked about, it might be harder to quantify, but it's absolutely real. If your drivers become more safe, it helps your company's reputation. Most of your vehicles, I would bet, are plastered with your branding. In fact, many fleet companies say their number one advertising expense and benefit is the signage on the sides of their vehicles. Absolutely is true. But take our plumber example. If he's driving through a neighborhood super fast and cutting people off and hard braking and accelerating, is the person down the street that needs a plumber going to reach out and hire that company? Likely not. So making sure that you're managing your company's reputation by being able to use your fleet safety program as a link to making sure that your reputation is in sound. In addition, what studies have found is that driver employee retention is actually higher if they don't feel the pressure to have to drive 100 miles an hour. Costs related to turnover are minimized because if they're staying longer, obviously. And customers want to do business with a company whose drivers are courteous and following a safety procedure. Again, back to my original point of a safety program helps, lost my train of thought for a second. The safety program helps your reputation with the business. It helps you drive new sales, is where I was going with that. So those are, some cascading benefits. To that point of my question in the beginning, if you're trying to justify for your organization, yes, we need to make an investment in safety, here's what we can do. And so I'm going to move on to the second part of this presentation, and it's really talking about tangible change. And I have to talk a little bit about continuous monitoring because it really is the start or the catalyst for putting in place this ability to measure and manage the driver performance piece of the safety program you're putting together. And so we know typically you have to buy an MVR when you hire somebody. If you're non-regulated, you may not have to, but you're likely purchasing an MVR for them, and you might be purchasing them once per year. What monitoring does, if you're not familiar with it, it takes a look on a regular basis. So, for instance, if you're buying an MVR every year, you get a snapshot of that driving record. But a month after you buy the MVR, if that person gets a DWI and has his license suspended, and you don't know about it for 4 to 6 months until that driver's license or the DWI is mitigated in court, then that suspension is a tremendous risk for your business. In fact, the courts have said it's your job to know that had happened and that driver shouldn't have been on the road. We did an entire webinar a year ago on this concept of negligent entrustment, and it said what the courts are saying is that the fleet owner has a responsibility to proactively monitor and watch what their drivers are doing or what the people they're putting on the road, what is their risk profile. So there's a lot of risk. A lot of people are moving to this. It should become a staple part of your safety management program. And the one thing I would say to this on the insurance side of the house is about 93% of accidents are caused by driver behavior. So understanding what's happening with that driver when he's not driving your vehicle and he's driving his personal vehicle becomes a critical point in terms of managing the overall safety within your business. So there's the slide is also talking about speeding violation being an indication of fuel wasting. That's absolutely true. A note from the insurance industry, I can tell you that a single speeding violation makes a person about 10 to 15% more expensive to insure. So it gives you an idea, direct relationship to how speeding tickets impact accidents. But tracking suspensions and violations in DWI is a very important part of any safety management program. And it plays out in the data as well. This is a stat that we looked at a number of our customers, and we looked at their first month of monitoring where their average safety score was at. 2 years later, their safety scores had gone down by 28%. They had a 28% improvement in their safety score after running a continuous monitoring program. It's all about helping reinforce the right behavior with your drivers and making sure that you've got certain risks in your business mitigated that you can see from continuous monitoring. So that's, you can, if you don't have that program today, you should seriously think about implementing it, for all the reasons I just talked about. The next thing I want to talk about is training a little bit. I was with a customer and I asked the customer, I said, how do you guys use training? Do you guys have a training program? And the safety director said, yeah, we got a training program, all right. I watch that telematics thing, and if I get too many hard brakes or if he gets a violation, we take that driver and we pull him out of the field and we put them in a conference room for half a day, and they get their training and they don't leave there until they pass the test. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, that might work. It also might breed contempt from the driver. They're not in the job. They're not out there making their money. They're being forced to do something, so they probably have a negative experience with the training. The way that we're looking at training is it needs to be constant. It needs to be short, consumable bites, and it needs to be transferable. So it should be relevant to exactly what that driver needs, but it also should be frequent enough at intervals so that they can do it quickly. Video training is awesome. I often joke with my wife, I think I could do knee surgery if I could watch a video on YouTube. But video-based training that can be pushed right to the driver. They can do it when they're sitting at the cafeteria. They can do it when they're done driving for the day. They don't have to be taken out of the field. And reinforcement, again, is backed up by the data. This is a study that shows accident rates based on how long out of training a driver has had. And if you look at the results, you see a 20% improvement in accident rates if you train on a monthly basis versus waiting 4 to 5 months. So those are a couple of ideas. If you are interested in driver monitoring or training, you should reach out to Supervision. We've got some great programs to talk to you about. So the last section of our webinar is I want to talk a little bit about driving cultural change. Because as I thought about this webinar, we're really focused on the benefits and what you can do. And everyone knows, in order to have a successful training program, you want to have a telematics program in place. You want to have monitoring and training, and you want to have procedures and management support, and all of that matters. But it only matters to the point that you can get adoption. It only matters to the point with that driver when he drops his bottle cap on the floor of his truck, he thinks, you know what? It's not safe, so I'm not going to do that. And unless you can drive that change, you're not going to be successful. You might be successful in putting in place a safety program, but you won't necessarily be successful in driving cultural change where safety becomes a core principle in your business. So I want to talk a little bit about this. And the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of being unconsciously competent. And what that means is, has anyone on the phone or on the webinar had the experience where you've left your house to go to work and you've driven to work and then you pulled in the parking lot and you realize, I don't even remember my drive to work. I just got here. And, you think, man, I just drove a 2,000-pound vehicle, 20 minutes and 80 miles an hour, and I don't even remember getting here. And it's a concept that we get as we get really good at tasks that's called being unconsciously competent. It's very dangerous. If you've ever confronted one of your employees after a mistake was made, and it was a clear and obvious mistake, and you said, what happened? And they said, I don't know, I just wasn't thinking. If you've ever heard that, that's somebody who's been unconsciously competent. And what it means is that we're smart people. We do things often, and if we do things often enough, we can just do them in a rote fashion, but we're not thinking about the process and the procedures and the why we do what we do. And it's in those instances where safety things happen that can put people and equipment at risk. It goes back to this idea of how we learn how to do a new task. So let's just put our minds in our place in the mind of a brand new driver. I've got a new truck. I might not know how to operate it as well. I've got a new route. I'm on roads where I typically aren't driving. And I've got new customers, so all my stops are different. All my parking is different. When I'm in that case, in that situation, I am in what they call unconscious incompetent. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm very aware that I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm asking a lot of questions. It's also coincidentally the most likely chance that these people have an accident. But there's a lot of questions, and drivers need a lot of support, and they need a lot of training, and they need to be shown how to do things. But as they get the hang of their skill and they get better, they move into the next phase, which is conscious but incompetent, meaning they're aware that they're not very good, but they're still not very good. But they're following the process, they're listening to your training, they're getting better. And as they become more and more skilled, they then quickly become consciously competent. And that's the area of the pyramid you would love people to stay. Because at that point in time, I'm good at my job. I know what I'm doing. I understand the process and how it relates to safety. So I'm aware of the process, and I've also developed an expertise, so I'm good at it. And when people are in that mode, which is where we would like them to stay, they're least likely to have an accident. They're least likely to violate policy because they understand why they're doing what they're doing. People become unconsciously competent when they move past the conscious competence stage because everything's become easy and rote, and they kind of forget. As a leader, I would encourage you guys to constantly bring back process to your people, constantly bring back refresher training, help them understand that being in this consciously competent area will help them in the long run do a better job at their job and reduce accidents, thus driving more safety. It's just an important thing as a leader in an organization to be able to reinforce these kind of things. The next thing I want to talk about is coaching and giving feedback, because I've been in a lot of situations where I see this done wrong. And if it's done wrong, the idea of a safety program that people can be excited about and get behind and say, yep, it's part of who we are and it's really important to us, it can become bitter. And the example of the manager and the trainer that says, I yanked those people out and I put them in a conference room to do their training, you run the risk of people rebelling and saying, yeah, these guys are just talking safety, they don't really care. If you provide feedback when mistakes are made correctly, then it becomes part of the culture. Your employees will endorse the training program. Let me give you an example, a quick example for you. First of all, I want you guys to understand that most of our personalities are formed by the time we're 7, right? Your ability, whether you're going to be open, whether you're not, you're going to be an introvert or an extrovert, our personalities are set by the time we're 7. The difference between an adult and a 7-year-old is as adults, we develop coping mechanisms, meaning that when someone yells at me, I put in place coping mechanisms that I don't react the way that a 7-year-old was. A 7-year-old might cry or might tell you they're scared, but an adult won't tell you that. But inside, they're treating this much the same way that the 7-year-old does. They'll just hold it in, you won't know it. The reason it's important is that when you're giving feedback, it's really, really important to make sure you recognize how you're giving that feedback and how you're directing the feedback, or again, you can lose your employee. I'll give you a quick example. I used to coach my kids' baseball team. And little Danny played shortstop for me. And Danny's dad was one of the assistant coaches in the dugout. And sure enough, there's a ground ball hit to short, and Danny's not paying very close attention. The ball rolls between his leg, and it rolls out into left center field. And I look over at Danny's dad, and he's losing his mind. He's just screaming, "That's your ball, Danny. You need to get that ball. That's your ball. You have to know that." And I thought to myself, I'm pretty sure the only thing that Danny knew was that was his ball. What he didn't know is he needed to bend at the knees and get his bottom low to the ground and put his glove in the dirt because it's easier to pull the glove up for a bounce than it is to put the glove down. He didn't have the specifics to make the right, because he needed to pay attention on every pitch. Those are the things that missed. What he did learn from that is Dad's mad at him. He's embarrassed because everyone can see him getting chewed out. And he didn't, he went on, probably impacted him in a very negative way. So when you're giving coaching, try to be very specific. I always tell people, address the behaviors. If someone's violating your safety rules, the safety rules are the issue to address, not the person. If you address the behavior, because I as an individual can get my head around, okay, I have to do this, I have to solve this behavior, but what I can't get my head around is I'm a bad person because I'm not following the rules. So make sure you give them specific instructions, repeat them, demonstrate them, be positive, make sure that people understand they're good to what they do and they're bad. The number one reason drivers leave companies is because of their bosses and how they feel they're treated. Addressing people in a accountable way, but in a way that doesn't, diminish the human being will help you build any type of cultural change. So then let's move on to accountability, because we all have to own accountability. And I want to tell you another quick little story. But there was a driver, and he made a mistake, and he cost the company $1 million. And he walked into the VP's office, and the VP said, "What happened?" And he told him. He said, "Why did it happen?" And he told him. And he said, "What is your plan to make sure that this is not going to happen again?" And he told him. And the VP looked at the driver and said, "Okay, you can go." And the driver turned around to leave, and he paused, and he turned back around and said, "Wait a minute, I thought you were going to fire me." And the VP looked at him and said, "Why would I fire you? I just spent $1 million training you." So there's always opportunity to help the driver move forward, even in sometimes the worst case scenarios. Now, obviously, you can take that if mistakes continue, accountability, you might have to do something different. But if you take the approach with your employees and the people that you want to help drive this change, and you say, "I'm going to try as hard as I can to help my team be successful, and what could I do to help them accomplish that?" You'll find that people will accept a new training program or a new safety program far better than if you lay it on their desk and say, "Here's your contract, you're going to sign this. If you violate this contract, you're going to be fired." Because all that defensiveness builds, and people are going to rebel against you trying to drive change into their world. If you approach it from a standpoint of why it's a benefit for everybody, and you approach addressing it with issues instead of people, you'll be more successful in driving the cultural change you're looking for. So with that, I'll just recap this entire conversation that I've had with you over the last 35 minutes. We know that safety programs work. We know that they reduce crashes, but they have benefits beyond just reducing crashing. The things we talked about were like fuel savings and reputation and driving additional sales. Adding program elements that you really need to have in that program, like telematics, continuous monitoring, training programs that are customized and focused at the driver, are all things that you can do from a program implementation standpoint that helps solidify a safety culture within the organization. And then finally, cultural change is hard. People don't like to change. People are oftentimes distrusting of these kinds of programs, that they're going to slow them down, take them out of their job. They're going to push back. Build it in such a way that gives your drivers the respect and ties their goals to the company goal of being more safe, and you'll be much more successful in implementing your safety program. So that is the end of the presentation. We are going to open it up to questions now. So if Chris or if someone can tell people how they can ask a question, we can open that up.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, Russ, and thanks again for that informative presentation. I think you gave us a lot of food for thought, and we do have some time remaining, so let's answer a few of the questions that came in during the presentation. And as a reminder, you can ask questions anytime during the webcast, including and especially during our Q&A section. So I'll kick it off with a question that came in about license monitoring. So this person wrote in, they thought that their understanding that it was only required to pull an MVR once a year, and you talked about monitoring it continuously. So what should people do? What's the best practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you are a regulated fleet, you are required to pull an annual MVR. That's within the regulations. A lot of states, many states, if you're doing a continuous monitoring program, it actually takes away the need to buy that annual NVR because you're watching that driver behavior on a monthly basis. The idea behind monitoring, though, is you can still buy your annual NVR if you have to, but if you have to look more frequently. And our monitoring is as much as daily in some places where we're monitoring for license suspension and violations, and knowing that information sooner is the whole benefit of monitoring. Because, for instance, if you're a regulated trucking company and you have a driver with a suspended license and they get pulled over, or if they have to go into a weigh site and that suspended license, that truck sits there until you get a driver out to take that load forward, and it's incredibly expensive. Having continuous monitoring in place helps that. If you're only ordering the MVR once a year, you'll never know that suspension ever happened. Something like a third of suspensions are for non-driving offenses, things like failure to pay child support or failure to appear at some court date will cause a driver's license to be suspended. If you're a fleet owner and you don't know that your driver's not paying his child support, then you're going to have a driver, because drivers are going to lie, right? They get paid for being on the road. You're going to have a driver on the road with a suspended license, and it's incredibly costly if they get caught or, God forbid, get into an accident with a suspended license. And then you're talking about negligent settlements that have been upwards to the multi-million dollars. So that is why we say, yes, the regulation is once per year, but continuous monitoring is so much better.
Right. All right. So this one, here's a question that's related to spec'ing. You talked a little bit about spec'ing vehicles for safety features, and you went over one scenario about how they've been shown to limit front and rear crashes. Are there been any other safety features that have been shown to reduce crashes in any way?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. Some are more effective than others, and some are more effective at preventing crashes, but then also they cost so much more to fix that they're almost a bad deal. So I'll give you an example of one that that isn't working all that well, and that is there's a lane departure warning. And I don't know if people are on the webinar that have lane departure warning, but every person I talk to, they're irritated with it because it beeps all the time. People shut it off, and because they don't see the value in it. And that's having very little impact to the business, to accidents from what the initial analysis has been. But other things like lane departure warnings, those features are not turned off very often because people really like the light that flashes in their side mirror to let you know there's someone in your blind spot. And also that's having an impact of stopping crashing. The one feature that is really interesting, because if you look at IIHS has done a ton of studies. They're an insurance safety organization, and they looked at it's called rear collision mitigation. The car's backing up. It has sensors that will automatically apply the brakes so you don't back into a pole. And it has reduced those types of accidents by almost 25%. The problem is the bumper went from being a $400 bumper to costing about $2,500 to repair. So when you look at the actual cost to repair the bumpers against the reduction in accidents, insurance companies, this is insurance, but it's analogous to a fleet owner, have found that it's actually a negative impact to cost because the bumpers are so much more to fix. But it has reduced accidents by a lot. And that doesn't consider any liability, like if you backed your car into another person. It's only to that vehicle. So that should give you some ideas. But there's 22 different features, and cars are moving down this road to autonomous, and every year there's more and more of these features coming out. It's something to pay close attention to.
Right. But it just occurs to me as you're talking, one of the things I think it's important to also stress, and I think you did in your presentation, that technology is only one aspect. You can't just say, okay, I have an anti-collision device, and it's going to save me because now I have no responsibility, and I can be going back to your pyramid. I can just be completely unconscious and zone out while I'm driving to work. So you still have to encourage active, thinking,
Yes.
As it were. So
to this date, you absolutely do. And I was at a conference. This might be interesting to people, but I was at a conference a few years ago, and Kim Hazelbaker, who works for Hildy, the company that does the crash testing, showed a video of a Tesla with the autopilot system engaged. And the driver's sitting there, and he's got his hands 2 inches from the steering wheel, and the car's driving itself. And the car's got a camera on the outside line that disappeared as he went over a bridge, and the Tesla darted. It didn't just coast, it darted to the guardrail looking for the line because it thought it had lost the line, and the car just jerked towards the guardrail, and the driver had to grab it and pull it back. So even though autonomous driving is getting better and better and better, it is not without its issues. And in the short term, it might be making these vehicles more risky because of what you were saying, Chris, about you got to be ready all the time to take control of the vehicle.
Yeah, the human factor is still a factor, in other words. All right.
Yes.
And as you were speaking, talking about this, a question came in, and it's kind of the flip side of what we're talking about here. There are some safety options you kind of mentioned with lane departure. The drivers can turn them off. Now, how can you proactively? This question is, how can you proactively manage this behavior so your drivers aren't turning off things that you may have spec'd up and spent some extra money on, that particularly like some of the anti-collision devices that they may be able to turn off, that you spent a lot of money on to help keep them safe?
Yeah, so I will answer it a couple of different ways. A, you might not be able to control it, but I can tell you from the research that I've done for the insurance side of the house, people like these features. I saw a study just recently about the advanced collision warning. Something like a third of the people that have bought that feature would say it prevented them from getting into an accident. So if they find value in the feature, they're not going to turn it off. The lane departure, or the lane keeping one, is the one that notoriously people turn off. It has very little value anyway. So you should just know that. But then I would also coach you to say it's part of teaching your safety program that these features were bought because of our company's commitment to safety, and you should continue, as part of that culture, you'll want to keep these features on. And then at the end of the day, it will come down to how well have you sold your safety culture into your fleet with some of the features.
Right. This is kind of a broader question. Maybe we don't have time to answer it all, but maybe talk about maybe the 2 or 3 top elements of a good safety program. What would you say would be like the top, maybe in because of our time constraints, what is maybe the top one or 2 or 3 elements of a good safety program?
Sure. So I would break it into like programs in which you can implement, like things that you could buy, and that is a good training program. You want to order motor vehicle records and monitor your customers for the driver behavior piece of it. Telematics and ELD programs are really changing your ability to understand what's happening when the driver's driving. So those are kind of things that you can go out and implement that will help you control and manage the safety culture. Then there's things that you can implement. So you can have written policies and procedures that define exactly what your safety program is. You can have driver agreements where the drivers sign off and say, as long as I'm working here, I agree to these safety procedures. And then there's things management can do. That would be the last category. What are you doing to support your drivers? Do you have the senior leadership in the company, preaching and practicing good safety mechanisms? And are they following up and helping you? Are you having rewards and incentives for the good drivers, people that are not getting in accidents, is that on everyone's mind? Because if that's meaningful, if there's incentives, that can help drive the program. So I covered about 10 things there. I broke it into 3 categories. But if you look across the industry, that is what most companies are doing. Unless, Chris, you may have some ideas of things I might have missed. But that's where I would think.
Well, one thing and it came up. I was thinking about this a little during your presentation and talking about drivers. You know, one of the things with having a good reputation, you're not only going to be having better retention, but you're also going to be attracting drivers who value safety and are going to have really a much more of a safety orientation to the way they drive, not only for work but maybe in their private lives, and that's a real value proposition for them for working at the company. So, how important, do you find, at least in your experience, that you see that kind of driver profile? A strong safety program with rewards, incentives, accountability, good training, frequent training, attracts those kind of drivers, or at least, and maybe you might have a green driver, but turns them into that kind of driver.
It's a really good question, what I would think about is how much do these companies are they able to pay? And what I would think about, and I might even try to explain this to my drivers, but if we have fewer accidents, if our cost of maintenance is lower, if I can drive a less expensive delivery than my competition, then I can afford to pay my drivers more. And if I can pay you more, if you're a safe driver, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I can hire the best drivers. I teach them they are the safest drivers. I drive more profits out of the business. I can share that back with my drivers. That's how I would approach it. And when I look at the leading companies, and I won't use their names, who knows, they might even be on this webinar, but they are really doing that. They're paying for performance. They've got incentives in place, and safety is absolutely ingrained in their compensation plans.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Well, unfortunately, I can't believe it. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. But for anyone who asks a question that wasn't answered, we will be following up via email to answer them individually. We hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar, and I want to again thank Russ Belland and Supervision for today's presentation. I also want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the Automotive Fleet website at automotive-fleet.com/webinars. And again, I want to thank everyone who attended the webinar today, and I hope you all have a great day.